All right, I'd like to introduce Dr. Stork. Dr. Gil Stork, who has announced his retirement after 50 years with the college. He will be retiring in 2018, only to go on and run his Rotary Club. To dedicate a half a century of one life to a single college exemplifies true loyalty and passion. The leadership of Dr. Gil Stork has surely touched countless lives and inspired many in San Luis Obispo County and around the state. Dr. Stork has always supported and been a proponent of the Writers' Conference, and he will be missed. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Stork.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you, Terry. Well, it makes me sound really old. Yeah, it is pretty amazing. I think I started here in 1967. I was 25 years old. I was a football coach, had no idea what life was going to have for me with this particular opportunity. And what I learned throughout the time is how critical the California community colleges are to every region of California. We are the community's college. We only exist because of you. And we only exist to serve you. And we find so many ways in which we can reach out and create something for everybody. Right now we're kind of reinventing ourselves because the times have changed. It's a buyer's market now. We really have to listen very carefully to our students and our community as to what is it they want. How do they want it delivered? When? And in what format? Is it face-to-face? Is it online? Is it hybrid? Is it transfer-oriented? Is it skill development? Is it certification for employment in a specific field? It's a very different time than I even walked back into after I came out of retirement in 2010 to take on this job. Even then, we were able to throw out any classes we wanted and they would fill right up. But you also remember we had high unemployment then. And that's when we really flourished as a college in terms of meeting a lot of people's needs. So we are having to redesign. Some of you have accessed our emeritus program. We're energetically redeveloping that because that's one of the biggest markets we have right now, is a growing and a vibrant and an intelligent retirement community who isn't willing to stop learning. And it's our job to be able to provide those learning opportunities. Yeah. So I'm very, very proud of this college and what we've been able to establish. Today, before this event, you were out in what we call the Arts Plaza. It's an amazing environment where we have our Miosi Art Gallery, we have our Culture and Performing Arts Center. And this has become the center of not only fine and performing arts, but it's also becoming a center for the literary arts, of which you are taking part in today and tomorrow through this Writers' Conference. That's what we really envision the college being able to be a destination for the creative minds and the creative talents of all of you, or those of you who are trying to develop your creative talents. I'm always enamored by the art shows we have. We have a new one opening tonight, which is really going to be impressive. It's always fascinating to me to see what people create. But not only what they create, is what was the idea? What was the message that inspired them to create that? And so being able to come to the artist's opening show and hear from the artist the motivation, the inspiration, and how that idea was transformed into a three-dimensional object or a two-dimensional painting or sketching. It's the same thing with the written word. When I read books, whether it be novels or historical fiction, I'm always fascinated by, especially on fiction, is where the ideas came from. and be able to create in my mind an image of place, an image of feeling emotion, just by the written word. I'm a good writer, but I write a lot of professional stuff, you know. And I think I'm really good at communicating, but I'm always in awe of those writers that can make it come alive and seemingly vivid in my mind of what's really going on, even if I've never been in that place or that time in history. So thank you for being here. This is the 33rd, is that right, Terry? Let's see, that was around 1984 then, wasn't it? Yeah, I was the Dean of Science and Math at the time, you know. And to watch this event grow and be sustained. You know, how many things in your life have been going on for 33 years? You know, my car certainly doesn't last that long. My house has, but not with a lot of care and repair. Thank God my marriage has for 53 years, you know. But, and I know for many of you, this is your first involvement in the Writers' Conference. How many, this is the first time Writers' Conference for you? Yeah. So, and to me, that's part of the magic of a successful event. It keeps attracting and keeps perpetuating new clients, new people who are going to go out and tell their neighbors or their friends or family members to say, this was a wonderful experience. You ought to come and try it out, you know. How many of this is the first time you've been in this facility, the Culture Performing Arts Center? This is one of the most well-equipped performance centers in all of California. It was designed to be smaller and more intimate. It's a teaching facility for our dramatic arts and our performing arts. And it has what's called the Constellation sound system, which you can replicate any major concert hall in the country, Carnegie, the Disney Center, by the electronics that we have, the computer system. You can make it sound big, you can make it sound small, you can make it sound alive, you can make it sound dead. Cal Poly and the PAC just adopted this system when they redid their system, so they have the same system now that we have. So try it out for some of our other performances. You'll be amazed at what it feels like in here. You're close enough to be part of not only the audience, but you're part of the activity. So, yes, I will be retiring in June. I tried it once in 2004, and I got drawn back in. I thought I was free, but I think I was still on a retractable leash, and I got drawn back into the web. But what a tremendous professional opportunity for me to see this college thriving again, and being able to be a showcase in California for community colleges, and being a tremendous resource for you and your families and your neighbors. You know, we are now, this is our 4th year of offering the Promise Scholarship, where we offer for every San Luis Obispo County high school graduate, whether a public school, private school, home school, or GED completer, a year of free tuition and fees here at Cuesta College. We started 4 years ago in 2014. We had 643 local students sign up for the Promise. This year we had 900. And it's going to continue to grow. That's the good news. The bad news is that our $8 million endowment, which was a gift from a wonderful family in Morro Bay that started it. We endowed the money, and we're using the interest off of that endowment. We're now maxed out that earnings off that. That's the bad news. But what it did is, it gave me an opportunity to start a $10 million campaign in order to beef up the first year. But before I leave here, I want to be able to offer a second year. So we can offer every San Luis Obispo high school or San Luis Obispo County high school graduate the opportunity and families to say, you can come to Cuesta College and we'll help relieve that financial burden of college. We'll also give those first generation students who didn't see college as an option, that lower economic student whose family said, you know, I hope we can send you to college, but we don't know where the funds are going to come from. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen here because of the wonderful gifts that we received and the wonderful gifts that are starting to come in. We've already generated about $2 million towards that $10 million goal. So, thank you. So there's a basket. Yeah, no, just kidding. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting us and having faith in us and supporting us, because there will always be a Cuesta. And I'm on what, you know, you hear a lot of retiring superstar athletes and so on say they're on their farewell tour, you know, or performing artists. I'm on my farewell tour now, you know. As a president, I took my last athletic compliance exam for the rules of athletics, you know, so this is my last welcome for a writers' conference, so I'm checking these things off. Not that it's a burden, it's really an opportunity for me to be able to reach out and say thank you. Thank you for your engaging with us, and thank you for supporting us. And I'm going to finish my 51st year in grand style. So thank you for being here and have a great time.
So next we have Tom Schulman. He is our keynote for the night, and after he speaks, we're going to do a brief Q&A and then watch his Academy Award-winning film, Dead Poets Society. Although my favorite's What About Bob? Baby steps. It's all about baby steps. So Tom Schulman was a graduate from Vanderbilt University with a BA in philosophy. He studied at USC Graduate School of Cinema, the Actors and Directors Lab, Los Angeles, with the director Joan Darling. He directed the Actors Studio West promotion of Harold Pinter's The Caretaker. Tom wrote Dead Poets Society, for which he received Academy Award. Though he has written a number of telemovies, Dead Poets Society was the first movie to reach the screen. He was hired to rewrite the hit movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids shortly before the film was due to begin shooting. He did it in 7 days. Okay, no more excuses, guys. If we can do it in 7 days, we can get this done. We're not going to be that guy. We're going to get it done. Anyway, on. He also wrote What About Bob, my favorite movie of all time, Medicine Man, Holy Man, and he wrote and directed 8 hits in a Duffel Bag. He was executive producer of Indecent Proposal, Me, Myself, and Irene, and the writer-producer of Welcome to Mooseport with our dear Doug Richardson. He co-wrote and co-produced The Anatomy of Hope, a pilot for HBO. Tom served on the board of directors and then the vice president of the Writers Guild of America West. Tom served on the board of directors, then as the president of the Writers Guild Foundation. Please welcome to our stage, Tom Schulman.
Hello. How are you? Am I double mic'd?
Yes.
Here and here?
Yes.
Oh, okay. If there's an option between sounding dead and alive, I'll take alive. So, heard that earlier, that the room could sound both ways. First of all, I have to confess that I have conference, I guess it's acquired conference keynote phobia. About 5 years ago, the Writers Guild asked me to go to Mumbai, where the writers in India were forming a Writers Guild. And they told me there was going to be a conference and that I wouldn't have to speak, but that I just was to advise the writers there about some of the things that we were doing here at the Writers Guild to organize, and create a guild and negotiate for better contracts and things like that. When I got there, they were very cordial. They said, please sit on stage at the beginning and we'll introduce you. And at the beginning, there was a Hindi translator. So the one gentleman is speaking in English, the other is speaking in Hindi. And then I hear the gentleman in Hindi say my name, and then I hear the gentleman in English and say, our keynote speaker, Tom Schulman. And I know nothing about what's going on there. So that was a tough time. So I want to thank the conference here for at least telling me that I'm the keynote speaker. That helps. I was told that it would be helpful before the screening of Dead Poets Society if I told you a little bit about how I came to write it. This is a writer's conference, right? I think it started when I was looking for a teacher to learn, a writing and directing teacher. I went to Vanderbilt University, as Terry said, and I was interested in, came out to LA to direct. And I think those hopes were dashed early when my first agent, standing in front of my agent, I said, you know, what I really want to do is direct. And that agent said to me, go look behind that plant in the corner. And I went, what? She had a big plastic plant in the corner, and I went and looked, and taped on the wall behind this plastic plant was a little bitty cartoon. In the cartoon there were two monkeys in a zoo throwing feces at the people outside, and the caption, one monkey saying to the other, what I really want to do is direct. And that was, she said, I came back and she said, that's what we think of your chances of directing in Hollywood. So, but I was looking for a directing teacher, and so I went to USC Film School. And my first directing teacher was a gentleman named Norman Torog, who I think held the record for directing more feature films than any other Hollywood director ever. 4 a year for something like 55 years, over 200 features. And his big claim to fame was directing Elvis movies. And but by the time he walked into the classroom, he was in his late 80s, and unfortunately blind, deaf. He had a cane, and he was there to screen the films we made at USC, the directing class made. And he walked in and he sat down and he said, I know that it's difficult for you to understand how a deaf and blind man can look at your films and critique them and teach you how to write and direct, but I can smell a good movie by the way it goes through a projector, so roll the films. And first film went through, and he would say to the person who directed that, someone would say me, and he'd go, young man or young woman, was that a comedy? And they would say, well, yeah. And he goes, I didn't hear any laughter. And they'd say, yeah. And he goes, well, make it funny next time. So, and then he would tell Elvis stories. So I left USC fairly quickly, I think about a semester and a half, and I remember sitting out in the courtyard there, very discouraged. Although Norman Torog had some really interesting Elvis stories. I think the best was that Elvis, that for years, the first few movies he made with Elvis, they would have Elvis lie down on the floor of his limo and cover him with coats and clothing, so that when they drove his limo out of MGM, where he was making these musicals, the fans couldn't get to him. And the fans would beat on the car, and Elvis was instructed to stay under the clothing. And I think the sad and interesting thing is that 10 years later, the last Elvis film, they had Elvis lying on the floor of the car and covered, but there were no fans there beating. They had to hire extras to beat on the car. So anyway, so good stories from Norman Torog. So I was sitting in the courtyard there and at USC, and a guy who had been a teacher at a junior high school where I lived in Nashville recognized me, and he was now a student at SC, and he was commiserating with me about that there was no good directing teacher there. So he said, I know just the place. And he sent me to a place called the Actors and Directors Lab, and a gentleman named Jack Garfine, who was a fabulous teacher, both writing and directing and acting, taught there, and he would bring his teacher, a guy named Harold Clurman, and I'll get to Dead Poets, I know this is around about. Harold Clurman would come from New York every 6 weeks to review Jack Garfine's work, and Jack's work was our work. We were Jack's students. And Clurman was probably the most charismatic speaker I've ever heard in my life. This man, he was one of the founders of the group theater in the 1930s, probably directed 30 or 40 Broadway plays. By the time I met him, he was the critic for the magazine The Nation, and he seemed to have been everywhere in the world at all times in history. He knew everything and could stand up and talk for 3 or 4 hours, never bore you, and he was like a human volcano on stage. He would just get so passionate about things. And after about 4 classes with him, or 4 times that he came, I decided I've got to write something about this guy. So I started telling friends about him, and they said, well, write something. excuse me, write something about the Actors and Directors Lab, write about the acting students. So I decided, this is a good idea. I'll write a movie or a script about an acting class. And very quickly, all the students in the class were sort of the same character, just someone who wanted to be an actor. And it got fairly discouraging, and after about a year of talking about it to friends and telling people about Clurman and so forth, I started remembering that I also had another interesting teacher, a guy named Sam Pickering, who was my sophomore in high school English teacher. And I think Sam seemed to me to be in his mid to late 30s. I think he was actually in his 20s. And he, like Clurman, was extremely exciting to be in. He had this sort of impish, mischievous sort of thing that you see in the Robin Williams character, those of you who've seen the movie, in Dead Poets Society. And he was always making us, involving the students in antics in class. So, for instance, he would have us read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and whenever he would say, quoth the Raven, there would be 6 of us standing in the windows of the classroom, and we'd all have to go, nevermore, this sort of thing. But it was always exciting to go to class, and I started telling friends stories about him, and it suddenly occurred to me, that's the teacher I should be writing about. So I wrote a draft of the script and wrote all of the teacher's stuff, and it was just dead. I mean, I think the talks, his lectures were interesting, or what I imagined he would say was interesting, but the story itself really didn't exist. So I did something I've never done with another script. I just threw it away. And about a year later, I woke up and I went, oh, I get it. It's not his story. It's the kid's story. It's the story of his students. So I had my first computer, and I started taking notes about the story, and I ended up with about 175 pages of random notes, everything from whole scenes to dialogue and whatnot, way too much to sort of organize in the computer. So I printed it all out. I sliced it up with scissors and a paper cutter into little strips, and made a pile, literally about 4.5 feet tall, next to my desk of all these strips. And I picked one up and I said, okay, this goes in the middle. And I put it out in the middle of the room. And I picked the next one up, this is a beginning. And ended up, spent 3.5 weeks putting all these strips on the floor and basically wove the story together. And I've decided that's a good way to write, because it's kinetic, and while you're moving the strips around and trying to figure out where they go, ideas pop into your brain about how these things all connect together. And that's what happened when I was putting the strips down. And by the time I got through putting the strips down and putting new ideas into the computer and making strips like that, I had a whole screenplay. I picked the strips up, I taped them 10, 12 at a time to a piece of paper. I put the papers in 3 binders, opened the first one, there were like 6 ideas for the title. I picked one, next thing were a couple of ideas for the first scene, picked those, and it was essentially a Bible for writing the script. And when I wrote the script, something different happened with that script, and I've always believed in showing my work to as many friends and trusted colleagues as possible. Something different happened, which is that usually people would say, oh yeah, it's great, and you'd go, yeah, you like that main character? Well, no, not really. I mean, he's kind of boring. It's like, oh, well, but this scene where they did this and this, yeah, it didn't really work. And after a while, you're kind of going, well, what's great about it? And the truth is nothing. So this one, though, people would call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm sitting here, I don't know why I kept reading this, but I couldn't stop, and I'm now sitting on the edge of my bed in tears. And this happened over and over again. And so I thought, okay, maybe this script is special. So I gave it to my agent at the time, and who called me up and said, let's have a meeting. We sat down, and he said, this is one of the best scripts I've ever read. It's certainly the best thing you've ever written. If you want to sell it, you've got to get another agent. I'm like, why? And he goes, first of all, the title, Dead Poets Society. Three words, any one of them would be a disaster in a title, Dead Poets Society, but they're all in one. And he said, it's a boys' school. Can you name me one hit movie about a boys' school? No. It's a teacher, so we can't help you. So I left that agent, sent it to 7 other agents, all but one passed. The one who didn't pass I went to his office. He was about 10 years younger than me. He had taken his shoes off, and I was sitting at the foot of his desk, and his feet were literally about this far from my head, and he was kind of half asleep, saying, yeah, I've read half of it. And he was at a big agency, ICM at the time. He said, I think I can put some of our young clients in this. I don't know, let me try. So I thought, okay, and I spent months worrying that he would read the second half of the screenplay and pass. But he never got it made. But about a year later, one of the producers that he had let read it called me and said, I can't get this screenplay out of my mind. I know it's going to be a really tough slog, but I'd like to try to get it made. So he sent me over to Disney with the script to some of the younger executives who said, we think this is a great script, but Dead Poet Society, poetry teacher, English, no, let's make it a dance movie. And so this was, not long after, I'm trying, what's Flashdance had come out. So I said, ooh, dance movie. And at the time you want work. So I was like, how? And they said, well, we even have a name for it, Sultans of Strut. So I thought, I don't know. And while I was thinking about it, my producer gave the script to Jeffrey Katzenberg, who read it and basically bought it the same day. My agent said to me, I said, well, what do they want to do to it? I mean, I've already had a really bad meeting over there. Do they want to turn it into a dance movie? I don't want to do that. He said, I've already said close. It's sold. I said, but it can't work that way. You can't sell it without me. He said, it's done. But he said, get in there and fight the fight and see what happens. So a couple of days later, I get 40 pages of notes that start with, this is a good script, we'd like to change it a little bit. First of all, let's get rid of all the students and just focus on the teacher. Let's start with the teacher when he's a student and so forth, and just eviscerated the story completely. And I just, sweat was pouring off of me. And I went to the studio a couple days later to have the meeting with the creative group, and Jeffrey Katzenberg was sitting over at his desk looking through the notes. The creative team that had done the notes were sitting around Jeffrey's in his little couch area, and I sat down with them, and they were kind of grim-faced. They clearly didn't like the script very much. And Jeffrey sat over there quietly, and he finally said, who did the notes, guys? And they all said, we did. It was a team effort. They need some more polish and so forth. And he said, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Let's just make the movie. And that's the only time in my career that ever happened. And if you know anything about studio executives, they just don't do that, especially not anymore. Almost every studio now has a creative committee of some 12 to 14 people, a greenlight committee. Every one of them basically has to want to greenlight the movie before it gets made, and the note process, rewriting process is hell. So anyway, so we 3 years later, the movie got made. They tried to cast Robin Williams in it, who wouldn't say yes, but wouldn't say no, and he did not show up the first day of principal photography, so they burned the sets and shut the production down. Then a star/director took over, and we were in development for about a year and a half, and he finally would not agree to shoot the movie on no later than November, and the studio insisted that it be shot in October, so they canceled it with him. And then suddenly Robin Williams was back in the movie, and Peter Weir was directing the movie, and it got made. And for me, that's just a miracle. And I think it shows what incredible luck it takes to get anything made, much less made well, because you think about the sort of serendipity of the kinds of things which seemed like disasters all the way through, and yet somehow, for me, it turned out well anyway. So that's that. And I hope when you're watching the movie that doesn't get in the way of what's there. For me, Peter Weir did a spectacular job. So as much as I loved the first director of the movie and thought he would have done a great job, I was really happy with Peter. So I don't know how many of you have seen the movie. I'm happy to take questions on any part of the process or something, as long as I don't have to spoil what's there. Yes?
As a writer, were you on the set whenever it was being done?
Yes. And
Does that often happen?
no, I mean, as a writer in Hollywood, you're there at the pleasure of the director. And some directors, most directors don't want writers there because I think they are afraid that actors will look at the writer and not to the director and to see whether they're doing a good job. So that's a little bit threatening, and I understand that. But Peter Weir, in fact, said to me, how come you're not directing this? I can tell you want to be a director from the way you wrote it. I said, if you had any idea how hard it was to get it made, I'm just thrilled you're doing it. And he said, well, you know, if you want to direct, I've directed 8 movies, and I'm happy to, you know, I want you on the set anyway, so I'm just happy to answer any questions. And I said, you know, unbelievable. I've never met anybody that generous since. And in fact, one day, about 3 or 4 takes in, I was talking to him right after a take would happen, and as soon as it happened, I'd come up and start, and he would go, do me a favor, just count to 10 before you talk to me. And I said, he said, no, just count to 10. I need to have my own thoughts before I hear your thoughts. And I said, okay, I'm going home. He said, don't let your ego get into this. Just do that. I said, all right. So about a couple of takes later, he looked over at me. He said, you're not talking anymore. And I said, I know. And he said, well, what did you think of that scene? So I told him, and he said, that's a good idea. Why don't you direct it? And I said, what? He said, you want to direct? Go over there and direct the scene. And I said, well, what if I screw it up? He goes, I'll fix it. And I said, okay. So I went over and started talking to Robin Williams, and I saw Robin look over at Peter with this sort of surprised look. Peter went, it's okay. So I told Robin a couple of things, and Robin did it, and Peter said to me, what do you think? And I said, I don't think it works. He goes, I don't think it does either. So that was that. That was my only, anyway, back there.
Can you talk about What About Bob? Because I love that movie.
Oh, thank you. What About Bob? What About Bob was the idea of Alvin Sargent and Laura Ziskin. Laura, the producer, and Alvin was an Academy Award-winning writer. I think he's won 3 Oscars for writing, Ordinary People, Paper Moon, and Julia, and had already done those things by the time the idea was pitched to me. And my fear was, if Alvin's not doing it, you know, what kind of sucker am I to walk into this trap? But Alvin said, you know, I'm not a comedy writer. And I said, from Dead Poets Society, I'm a comedy writer? What are you talking about? But they said, well, you're funnier than Alvin, so give it a try. So it basically, the idea came from a book. Alvin told me later, it came from a book where I think called August, which is this idea that in the month of August, all the psychiatrists in New York go on vacation, and what happens to the patients? You know, I mean, you've got your 12 months. You're going. Some people go in every day. I mean, 11 months of the year, you're going every day, and suddenly your shrink is gone. So that was the inspiration for the story, and. You know, my idea was that that Bob should be basically as desperate a patient as possible, as human. So multiphobic, any and everything is wrong with Bob, but and finds this shrink who helps him with baby steps, this sort of thing, and that, you know, leads to the story. So and we spent I don't know. Maybe I was pitched the idea, and then there was a writer's strike in '88, and so I basically was new to the guild, and you know, wasn't going to write, and the studio started calling me and every other writer that was working at Disney and saying, well, all the other writers are working, you should be working. They told us all the same thing. And then they decided to have a meeting with us all. And when we were all standing out there being lectured on why we should be working, we talked to each other and found out none of us are writing. So, you know, we're not going to write. But I had months to think about it. So wrote the script quickly, and the studio greenlit it. And, you know, and Bill Murray, who was sort of the idea for who the ideal Bob would be anyway, said yes. And there it was. Yes. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about your writing process and how it's changed since the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do those strips anymore. They're just, it's too time consuming. I do think it doesn't, in a way, get any easier. Every movie is like a whole new world to explore. So, you know, as much as I would like to have thought, oh my God, I've been doing this for so long, I'm getting better in the sense that I don't have to do all the prep. I still do all the prep. I still take a lot of notes. I still organize. I think it's really important you have to know your ending before you can write the story. And yet, when you first start writing, you don't know the ending. You don't even know what you're writing about. So, and for me, that's a normal part of the process, is to just some idea that for some reason I have no idea why just sticks with me, and I start exploring it. I sort of feel like it's sitting on a shrink's couch, and you just say, I don't know, a cow. There's a cow. And you just start, and the shrink is not going to say to you, you stupid idiot, a cow doesn't mean a damn thing. They don't say that. So you as a writer don't say that to yourself either. You just go, wow, a cow, what a great idea. And you start exploring that, and somehow something in you, some unconscious thing wants to get something out, and if you just sort of trust it, it will sometimes turn out to be something interesting, and a lot of times not. So I end up with files, lots of computer files with, just lines from a story, or 3/4 of a story, or whole stories that I no longer like. It's just dozens of things. And I just sort of trust my instincts that one day I wake up and go, that's the one, I just can't get this one off my mind, so I just start exploring it. And it's always interesting, the things these stories yield. They're not always good, but if it amuses me, I sort of have this idea, well, if I think it's funny or I think it's interesting, others will too. Not always the case. And that sort of gets to the craft level of things where, and it's really hard because you sit there and sometimes an idea will come to you that just knocks you on the floor laughing, whatever. And then you show it to people and they're like, what? It's not, this is drama, right? So you just, but for me, and that's always a puzzle. It's like, what do you mean this isn't funny? This is the funniest thing that ever happened in since people started writing. But no, so you learn somehow. Okay, I'm leaving something out, something that I'm sensing about this scene isn't working. So there's this constant struggle to sort of communicate what you want to communicate to the people who are reading first, and then the audience later. So. And that's sort of the frustration and the fun of it. I heard the lady talking about Create saying that they want to help get rid of the frustration of screenwriting. I am on board for that. So, over here.
I think I saw the movie 5 times in the theater, so thank you for making such a great film.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the Oscar process? Because I think that must have been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that was, believe it or not, back in the years when there was no campaigning for Oscars. It was kind of considered, not something you did. You didn't want to appear to want one. So, and at that time, Disney made the faux pas of sending out, because those were also the years when VHS cassettes were kind of new. I mean, they were maybe only 3 or 4 years old, and Disney had this idea, hey, let's send a VHS cassette of Dead Poets Society to all the members of the Academy. And when the producer told me about this, it was like, oh my God, this is just terrible, how classless. And worse than that, on the trailer in the middle of the first, in the video in the middle of the first scene, it was talking about the grosses of the film and how much it had done domestic, how much it had done foreign, and reviews, and you just thought, this is so tacky. So, but then it did get nominated, and it was sort of, for me, a lesson in where writers are in the hierarchy of Hollywood. My presenter that year was Jane Fonda, and I was, by the way, still at that time, I mean, if you've seen Dead Poets Society, there's a shy character. I don't think I'm giving anything away in the movie. Sort of modeled that character off of me. So I remember sitting in the audience as they were reading the names thinking, please don't call on me. I do not want to have to get up there in front of all these billions they tout as being there. But they called me, so I went up there, and when I was done with my speech, I was walking off with Jane Fonda, and I'd forgotten to thank one of my agents, terrible faux pas, and I'm now kicking myself. And she looks at me, we're getting ready to get on an elevator to go down into the bowels of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, where there's the press was down there, and she goes, what's wrong with you? You just won an Oscar, what's wrong? And I said, I forgot to thank somebody. And she goes, well, just thank them next time. And I thought, well, okay. We went down to the bowels of the Dorothy Chandler, and you open it, the elevator opens, and you walk onto this little stage, and there are these giant plastic Oscars left and right, and there are bleachers in front of you, right in front of you, these people right in your face, about 30 or 40 members of the press there. And so Jane walks in with me, and immediately the people are going, Jane, what's like life? She's just back, by the way, from being away from Hollywood for years. So, Jane, what's life like with Ted Turner? Jane, what movies are you going to do? Jane. Jane goes, wait a minute, let's stop this right now. This is not about me. It's about Tom. He just won an Oscar, Dead Poets Society. Please direct your questions to Tom. Pause. Somebody says, Tom, what's it like getting an Oscar from Jane? And Jane says, that's it, and we walk off stage, and I take my little Oscar, and I go back and I sit down, and that was it. So you realize, the hierarchy, actors, directors, writers, down. Yeah. Anybody else?
I was trying to follow the journey when you said, I threw away for a year, the next year, then it was 3 years. I lost track of when you started your notes.
Yeah.
And then you threw it away, then you went back to it, to the point that it was made. What is the year?
Let's see, I started my notes in 83. I threw it away in 84. I picked it up again in 85. My agent fired me in 85. And then it sold, the Disney sale happened about a year and a half later, so we would say late 86, early 87, and then it got made in 89. And by the way, that is really fast. I mean, at the time it just felt like, this is forever, and you never know, it could have never gotten made. But, and in fact, at the time, I had written a treatment for a TV movie called The Gladiator, which is sort of based on, it's kind of a road warrior kind of thing. And ABC bought it, and they wanted to read a writing sample before they would approve me to write the script. So I gave them a writing sample of a kind of a hard-boiled thing I wrote called Rampage, same genre. And they read Rampage, and they said, absolutely not. We will not approve you to write that Gladiator. So, okay. So they hired another writer for that. As soon as they hired another writer, they called me up, and they said, we want to buy Rampage and turn it into... So wait a minute, you don't approve me as the writer on the other, but you want to buy it? Yes, we like the script, and we'll approve you for the rewrite. I said, wow, okay. So they bought the script, I did the rewrite. When I turned in the rewrite, before they'd read it, the guy says to me, now that you're turning in, we're obligated by Writers Guild rules to tell you we're hiring another writer to write this, to do the rewrite. I said, but you haven't even read it. I mean, maybe I nailed it. They said, no, you didn't. And I said, how do you know? They said, because you have no humanity. I said, wow. So, I called my agent and I go, this guy says I have no humanity. I'm talking to an agent, and he says, well, he said, well, this thing, Dead Poets Society, you have, that, I'm going to send them that. So he sent them that, and he calls me up and said, guess what? They want to buy it. And I said, tell them to go to hell. So that was that. But so I had some sense that the thing might get made, and looking back on it, I have no idea why I turned it down as a TV movie, but it just, caught me the wrong way. But anyway, 5 years or whatever it was, I think is a quick journey, and remember that when I have things now that are still kind of in the process of getting made one of them is 10 years old. So, and I still feel like it's going to get made tomorrow. So, yes. Okay. You get used to it. I remember the first script that, I wrote a script, the very first script I wrote, I sent out to some agents, and one agent called me and said, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but it's interesting, so I'm going to send it to some producers. He was at William Morris, this agent, and said, I can't sign you here, but if some producers are interested, we'll talk. So he called me a couple of days later and said, this great producer wants to meet with you. And I said, well, what are his notes? He said, I don't know. He just said he wants to meet. So I go to this producer's office at Warner Brothers. The producer says to me, where are you from? And I said, Nashville. And he goes, interested. You have family there? I said, yeah. He goes, go home. And I said, really? He said, terrible. You have no talent. Don't waste your time. So you know, that's the beginning, and you encounter that stuff all the time. Like this guy saying, you know, you have no humanity. I mean, people say these things, and they could be right, but so, you know, but I remember after that conversation, I went back. I was paralyzed. I was depressed. I had a job. I could barely get up and go to work. At least I had something to do during the days. But it was months before I could sit back down and start writing again. And then that script was rejected by everybody. And then it was only maybe a month before the next one. And slowly, the time frame between the rejection and the getting sort of back on my feet got smaller and smaller, to the point where really right now, by the time I finish a script and turn it in, I'm already on to the next one. And if people go, probably not going to work, it's 10 minutes of anxiety and that's it. So it works itself out somehow. I don't, you know, I think it's like addiction. You outgrow the drug. So, yes.
What advice would you give yourself as a writer in 1983?
Boy, you know, I mean, I look back and I think if I had known how hard it was going to be and how, you know, what the odds were, and I might have said walk away, but by then I was too old to do anything else. You know, it was too late to go to medical school or law school. You know, any of the things that would have been a track to actually making a living. But that's a good question. I would say write more. Back in those days, because there are always two problems. There's sort of the artistic problem and then the business problem. And there's sort of two tracks to getting things. You have to figure out, you just, you know, find your voice, whatever that means, and then you have to find some way to sell your stuff. And those things are happening simultaneously. And I think back then I was spending too much time after I finished writing something trying to get it made, instead of just, you know, both doing that and moving on to the next thing. I mean, I think writing is like a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets, the better it gets. And more exercise in writing just means more writing, more stuff, and just learning to you know, take a stab at things that seem interesting and see where they go. They don't always lead to something good, but do it, because the more you do, the better you get. Yes?
Hi, so I just wanted to ask how the collaborative process is in Hollywood. It sounded like a nightmare with all these people in a room focusing on your work
Yeah.
that you spent 6 years on. So what the hell? And by the way, I'm a Vandy grad too.
Oh, really? Oh, great. Yeah. You know, I've found that the people who are giving you notes, they're often really, really good. And so the trick is to somehow do the good notes and not do the bad ones, you know. And I've learned that the people who do the notes have a kind of pride of authorship about their notes, the same way we writers have about what we've written. I mean, that's their job to do notes, and they want to do a good job. So if in the room, and you know, one of the things they like to do to a writer is flatter you at first. Oh my God, we love this, da 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 da, and then by the time it's over, you realize there's very little they like, but they've tried to get you to be compliant. So I think to do the same thing with them is sort of you know, when they give you an idea, any idea, wow, that's really interesting, and you appear to write it down. And if you don't fight the writer, their ideas, 90% of them, even if you don't do them, they're fine. You know, and you do that way. Then you just go away and do the ones that you think are good. And if somebody happens to say, well, what about my idea, this and this, and you go, wow, it was such a great idea, I loved it, but you know, it kind of didn't work when this and this and this, and they're like, okay, they don't care, because they've been given all that positive feedback. So this doesn't work all the time, by the way, but it helps. So that's my fix for it. Back in the back.
This is just a fun question I like to ask authors, but I could ask you as well. If you could take any of the characters from any of your screenplays to an agent or to a producer to help pitch your next screenplay, who
Yeah.
would you take and why?
Well, I would take the teacher, my teacher Sam Pickering, I guess. There was also a friend that I sort of modeled What About Bob on, who is now a writer and is one of the most amazing pitchers in Hollywood. This guy he's never not sold a pitch, and he's almost never gotten anything made. And but I remember meeting him I was going to produce an idea of his, and we met on the Fox lot to go into the executive's office, and it was about 105 that day. And I actually wore shorts to the studio, which is really rare because it was just brutal. And he comes up and he is wearing a big, thick wool overcoat and a hat. And I'm going, what the hell are you doing? What's wrong? It's 100. He goes, well, I sweat a lot during these meetings. And I said, well, yeah, because you're covered with woolen coats at 108. He said, well, I just wear all these layers, and that way I don't sweat through by the end. So we go into this office, and he's the kind of guy that will just sit down and go, so there's this guy. And then he'll look, he'll go, you don't want guys right now, I can see it. Okay, so there's this girl. And it just starts to go like that. And he's so sensitive to what's going on in the room that he just comes up. I mean, when we got through with that pitch, none of us had any idea, including him, what he had just pitched. But they went, wow, love it, that's it. And yeah. Anybody else? Right here.
Did the real life Mr. Pickering ever get in touch with you or make comment about this movie?
Yes, I actually got a hold of him. You know, it was interesting because looking back on it, I mean, he was my sophomore in high school English teacher, young, much younger than any of the other teachers there, and much more, you know, vibrant, alive kind of guy. And after that year, he was gone. Came back junior, he was gone. So people were going, what happened to him, you know? And there were rumors that he'd had sex with the principal's daughter, you know, all this stuff. And so we were afraid to ask, so we never asked. And when I finally later investigated, I found, after I wrote the screenplay, I found out that he'd just gotten a better job. He'd gotten a job teaching at the University of Connecticut as a professor. So of course he left my high school. But I think that open question of what happened to him was kind of what fueled the what if for me of writing that story. Because it was, I didn't know what had happened. But I did find out that he was a professor at the University of Connecticut, so I sent him a letter, and he said, great, I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. And about, I guess, a year after the movie was released, Vanderbilt had me and him on a panel there. And he's quite a character and writes books, and you know, started out by saying, if I had lived carpe diem or preached carpe diem, I wouldn't be here, I'd be dead, you know. So he's very funny, but and I could never really tell whether he liked the movie or what, you know. It was very interesting, but seemed a really nice guy, really amusing, and his books are really good, so I would recommend them. Somebody else, right there.
Was the movie true to the screenplay, and if your work is not exactly replicated, are you able to let go of that, and do you consider them your brainchild, and it's hard to allow them to take it and change it that much?
First, yes, the movie was true to what I wrote, and that's probably maybe one of the few that were. And yes, the others, lots of others have been changed, you know, sort of beyond recognition. The very first script that I ever sold was a script called Love at Second Sight, about a psychic detective agency where they're solving crimes that haven't even been committed yet. And there was one line of dialogue from the script that was left in the movie, and you know, but you just, I guess maybe this is just Hollywood Stockholm syndrome, but you just learn to somehow put up with it, you know, and you're just so grateful that they've left 4 of your lines in instead of, you know, that you're happy instead of miserable that they've taken 90% of your movie and destroyed it. So you get used to it, and if you're going to be a screenwriter, you fairly quickly have to accept the fact that if you're not directing it, you're not gonna. It's only going to be luck if the director, you know, has the same vision of it. And what that usually means is that he or she likes the script the way it is, and will shoot it the way it is. I mean, I met with a director on one movie who said, you know, what's your favorite scene in the second act? And I said, I'm not even sure where the second act. He said, well, where would the second act end? And I said, well, if I had to drop a curtain, probably page this scene. And he said, that's right. Look, where is that in the script? And I said, it's page 91. And he said, yeah, it's a little late. And I said, well, as I remember Sid Field said, it could be between, 83 and 89. We're just talking 2 pages. He goes, I know, but it's a little late. Something's not right. I said, okay. He said, so back to that scene, what's your favorite scene in the second act? And I said, wait a minute, is this that kill your babies thing? Kill your favorite scene? He said, it could be. And I said, well, I'm not going to tell you what my favorite scene is. So he said, well, I'll tell you my favorite scene. And he told it to me, and it was my favorite scene. He said, so that's got to be cut out of the movie. And I said, why would we cut our favorite scene out of the movie? He said, well, our favorite scene ought to be in the third act. And I said, well, you asked me what my favorite scene in the second act is. But I said, he said, well, that's my favorite scene in the whole movie. And I said, it's on page 87. It's the end of Act 2. Why can't he? Said, no, I'm not going to shoot it. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to send a memo to the studio about this meeting because I want to see this in the movie. And he said, go ahead. So I did, and the studio sent him a memo back saying, this scene will be in the movie. You will shoot this scene, da-da-da. Never shot the scene. So, this was fairly early in my career. So you learn that the director is the god on the set, and you're there to try to get your vision in, but it's not going to happen all the time. Which is back to what I was saying earlier. It's very lucky. There's a lot of serendipity if a movie gets made. Well, I have friends that used to say to me, guess what? I sold a script. It's going to get made. And I would go, I'm really sorry to hear that, because this is the last time you're going to see your script the way you envisioned it.
I have a question that kind of piggybacks on that in terms of changes. So a couple years after the movie came out, I was at a souvenir shop in Hollywood, and they said it was an old script, old version of Dead Poets Society, and it had a very different ending than what was on the screen. So I'm curious. I can say it.
Oh, you mean where you find out the teacher has Hodgkin's lymphoma? That, yeah.
So that really was?
Yeah. That was not the ending. It was about page 80, and it was not in my notes on the floor, But when I got to that scene when I was writing it, I kind of felt like we need to know why the teacher has this sort of carpe diem, this philosophy of life. So I decided the kids will arrive in the classroom and the teacher won't be there. He's out sick. And they find out he's in the hospital, and they go and visit him, and he's got Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is terminal, but you can live, 20, 30 years if you're lucky with it. So, and then he's back the next couple of days later, and we're back to the story. And Peter Weir, when he got the script, told the studio he didn't want to do the ending. So I thought, oh my God, what? You don't want to do it? So I met with him, and he said, no, that's the scene I'm talking about, this Hodgkin's lymphoma thing. He said, so I've got a little pitch for you. He said, I'm not going to direct the movie unless you want to take this scene out, but you have to really want to. And so I said, well, in that case, I'm going to make a pitch for you doing the movie with it in. And he said, I hope you do that, because I'm not going to make the movie with it in. So we started having about a 3-day argument about it. His first argument was, this is just going to turn the movie into a kind of movie of the week weepy, where everything else about the movie is going to get consumed by this dying teacher. The critics will focus on that, and that's going to, suck up out everything else that's good in the script. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe not. And then he said to me on the 3rd day, okay, I think I understand why this doesn't work. He said, it's easy for students to stand up for somebody who's dying, for them to support somebody. We'd all do that. He said, but if he's not dying, then we know if they support him and they stand up for him, it's because of what he says and what he believed. And I couldn't think of it, and I thought, yeah, you're right. So, and he said, this is the easiest rewrite you've ever done. Just take that page on 78 out of the script and touch nothing else. You'll never miss it. And that was true. So, yeah. In the back.
So now that we're in the so-called golden age of television, where we have this long-form series on Netflix and HBO, how does that affect your perspective as a writer and as a visionary about, looking at what's the optimal format of movie versus the long-form TV?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it as a format problem. I mean, I love a lot of long-form television. It does annoy me knowing going in that it's going to be 40, 50 hours of my life before this story ends, you know, and then I know what happens because they're bringing me back week to week with these cliffhangers, and suddenly, you know, something that it was touted as a one-season, you know, mini-series is clearly going to go on and be another 5 seasons, and I'm now hooked. So 50 hours, 80 hours, do I really want to do that? No. But I'm gonna, because I love the series. But I think that form is great. What I don't like is what's happened to features, at least most Hollywood features, which is that they've now all become either sequels or comic book to movie films. So it's like, you know, they now call dramas the D word, meaning, you know, don't pitch me a drama because they don't sell. So, but as far as what long form television has done to features, and I don't think they've affected each other. I think there's been more effect on features of short form, meaning, you know, the stuff that's in our phones, and, you know, the really quick stuff that you know, short form stuff. 3 seconds, 10 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, that sort of stuff I think has changed our ability to concentrate. And then I worry about what that's going to do to the features long term, but I'm not sure that's a problem yet, and it may never be one. For me, it's more about the commercial realities of what Hollywood is doing now. Because it used to be that the studios would make 10, 12, 15 features. Each studio would make that many, and the studio executive would say, you know, most of this stuff is just sort of garbage commercial stuff that we like, but we don't love it, but we're going to try to make these 15 hits so that we can afford to make these other 5 movies that we don't think are commercial, but we love them and we think they should get made. They're just not doing that anymore. They don't have the time or the inclination to try to make those 5 projects that they love. So that's not good. And if you look at what's happening to the indie world, all those indie films are getting squeezed out of the theaters really quickly by these films that are released at 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 prints. So an indie film, doesn't matter what it costs, it's very difficult for it to stay in theaters long enough to make its money back, even if it's popular. So movie business is in a bad state, I think. Isn't that a bright note over there? Yeah. Yes.
Are you going to direct?
That movie that I've been trying to make for 10 years, yes, if it ever gets made.
So you still have it in you, you want to do this?
Yeah, I directed a movie called 8 Heads in a Duffel Bag, which was a nightmarish experience in terms of just being on the set and some of the dynamics of the cast and crew and so forth. So I'd like to try to do one right. I mean, that one was, I literally had a calendar on my wall at home, and like a prisoner, just Xing every day off, going, I'll be out in, you know, 32 days, 22, it was horrifying. So, yes.
Do you have any projects that have kind of been put in a drawer that they're your baby that someday you hope will come out? And if so, how many of them are there really?
I think I'm lucky that none of the projects that were my baby that are in a drawer were ever made. Those things, I look back on them, I mean, I've occasionally thought, oh, you know, that one was really good, and my agent will call me and go, somebody remembered a script of yours about so-and-so and so, and I go, oh, okay, right. And I pull it out and I look at it, and I'm too lazy to read it, so I send it to the producers, and then it gets the same feedback it got way back then, you know, which is, it doesn't really work. So, and I don't, you know, one thing that happens when you win an Oscar is that people say, you know, I don't want to give an Oscar winner notes. I don't, you know, if you wrote this, it must be good. And that's just wrong. You know, you're no better for having won it than you were for not. And you're no better afterwards. So, in fact, you're probably worse because your ego's too big and you don't want to listen to notes. So, so I think I like to accept what happened to those projects, you know, then and move forward. Anybody else?
Yeah, you mentioned that you wrote Indecent Proposal and Me in 7 days.
Well, I had to rewrite it in 7 days. It was originally a drama, and the people that made it, lovely people, they decided that they would do all of it was going to be a drama, and I think it was called Grounded, or I don't, they had so many names for it, but because Disney kept trying to make them turn it into a comedy, and they wanted to do all the special effects sort of analog, in other words, without any digital touching up. So the bee was going to be like a person in a bee suit, and the scorpion was going to be a person in a scorpion suit. So Disney got really nervous about this, and they had Rick Moranis on board, and Rick was nervous about this too, because they had told Rick, we're going to make it a comedy, and it wasn't becoming a comedy. So Disney asked them to do a screen test with a bee suit or something so they could see how this was going to work. And they shot it, and the next day Disney fired everybody, the writers, the producers, the director, the whole thing. And now at that point they have Rick Moranis, they're building sets in Mexico for the movie, and they have 10 days before Moranis is either going to show up on the set or not. And they, like, for some reason, they go, let's get the writer of Dead Poets Society to come in and make this into a comedy. So, and I remember my agent sent it to me like on a Wednesday night, and he kept calling me, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. I'm like, I can't even get through it. It's just, and he's like, I don't care, I've already said yes. I said, you can't do that. He said, I've done it. You got to show up tomorrow. So I showed up the next day, and I said, guys, they said that was Thursday. They said a week from Sunday, this thing is going to be sent to Rick Moranis, and he's going to decide that night whether he's in the movie or not. So that's when it's got to be in. You've got 10 days. And I said, I gotta think about this. I mean, I'll do it, but I don't know. What do I do? And they're like, no, you can't think. Go home and start writing right now. So I said, I'm not going to write till Monday. And they said, oh my God. So they took me through all the storyboards of the bee suits and all the bees and all the stuff. And they said, one of the producers said to me, this is just like writing porn, because we need a scene, you write the scene, and then there's this scene here, the bee ride. So you just write it to the bee ride, or, in porn, you just write to the sex scene and then to the next. So I was like, okay, that's not helping. But, on Monday, I woke up, and that's the first time in my life I've ever had writer's block, where I just sat down in front of the computer. I was terrified, and I couldn't write the first scene. I had the idea for it, but I just couldn't literally. My wife said, just write the second scene. I said, good idea. So I started that one, and I rewrote the script in 3 days, and then they gave me notes that night, and then rewrote the script in 2 days, and they gave me notes that night, and then rewrote it again in 2 days, and they gave me notes, and then on Sunday morning, we had to have a meeting to change one line of dialogue, and then they sent it to Rick Moranis, and I just went home and went to sleep. I had literally almost not slept all week, and I remember about 9 o'clock at night, my wife tapped me and said, Rick Moranis is on the phone. And I went, I'd forgotten all about him. So, never met him. And he just called and said, I'm so happy, thank you. And that was it. So, and I think for me, it was just a sort of, I had been writing for so many years trying to get into Hollywood that I'd gotten fast. So at least I had that. When Hollywood finally called, I could do it quickly. And there's something about having no governor on, nothing inside of you that can sort of, no critic, no inner critic that is the best. I would never do it again, but it was the best experience I've ever had, because all I could do was just write. I couldn't think about it. I just gave it straight to the people that were going to read it, right off hot off the presses, and it was fun to do it that way. So the secret is no sleep, I think. And think of it as porn. Anybody else? I'm sorry.
How were you able to convince them to keep your title with Dead Poets Society?
They didn't want to keep the title. They, in fact, they had a contest at Disney where it was more than a contest. They ordered everybody in the marketing department to come up with 25 title suggestions for the movie. Made them all read the script and come up with title suggestions. So one day, about 3 days before we started shooting, we got about 40 pages of title suggestions, just 2 columns every page. It was unbelievable. So they decided that the movie ought to be called Keating's Way, and they insisted that be the title on the slate. So, and I thought to myself, I hate Keating's Way, and I wasn't sure about the title, but I thought people thought people found it interesting. So, but Peter Weir was a little bit wary of it because we had gone to a video store to rent all of Robin Williams' movies. And the video guy recognized Peter's name on the credit card and said, "Oh my God, you're Peter Weir. Are you making a movie with Robin Williams?" And he said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What's it called?" And he said, "Dead Poet Society." And the guy said, "Oh, that doesn't sound very good." So Peter said to me, "I'm a little worried about this title." But after about 4 days on the set with Keating's Way on the slate, Peter said to me one afternoon, "I'm done with this. We're just going to call it Dead Poet Society." And I've sent the studio a memo. And they called and said, "Well, you can't do that." And he goes, "Well, then I quit." So they said, "All right, that's it." So that's how the title stuck. And you know what? If they had ever thought of another name for, let's just rename the club that the boys form, you know, the thing in the caves, then that could have been the new title. And I knew that, but I wasn't going to give them that at that time. So. Yes.
Robin Williams is well known for improvising. How much, if any, did he improvise with Dead Poets?
You know, the first day on the set, he was so on script, it was scary because it wasn't alive. And he came and did a day, and then he had to go back to New York because he was in Waiting for Godot on Broadway with Steve Martin. So he had 2 weeks there, and that was going to wrap, and he was going to come back, shoot the movie. So I was terrified. It's like Robin is this live, you know, such an alive guy, and to see him kind of so on book that he felt dead. Peter said, "You know, we've got 2 weeks to think about it." So when we got back, same problem in the classroom, and Peter said, "Robin, I just want you to do an improvisation of what would you like to teach these kids?" And he said, I don't know, maybe Shakespeare. Great, okay. And he turned the camera on and just said, "Come on in and teach them some Shakespeare." And he did, and he immediately understood what he was not doing, which was talking, even though it was just a teacher talking, it's a dialogue. So he was, you know, at that point, he's teaching them, and it was real. He was he was clowning around about Shakespeare and so forth. But at that point, he realized, oh, I'm trying to get a reaction out of these kids. I want to see whether this kid gets it. I want to see whether that kid gets it. And he was suddenly alive and got that and brought that right into the script too. So he added some of his lines and fun stuff, and Peter filmed that improvisation, and some of it's in the movie. So you know, it's at that point for me as a writer, anything Robin brought to it was great because it was both the script and him, that blend. I was worried before the movie, what kind of synthesis is this going to be between Robin's kind of wacky comedy and this teacher who's funny but funny in a different way. And once Robin found that, I didn't worry about it anymore. Anybody else? Okay, let's watch the movie. Thank you.